Welcome back to Face the Nation. Last week, the House passed a bill requiring TikTok to divest from its Chinese owner or face removal from U.S. app stores. Joining us now are the leaders of the House Select Committee on the Chinese Communist Party, Republican Mike Gallagher and Democrat Raja Krishnamoorthi. Good morning to you both.
Good morning.
Thanks for having us.
Congressman Krishnamoorthi, I want to go to you as the lead Democrat here. President Biden said he would sign this bill if it makes it to his desk. Have you gotten any indication from Leader Schumer that the Senate will take this up, or whether this legislation will die in the Senate?
Well, we've gotten indication that the leader is going to take it up in his process, and obviously we respect his process. Mike and I have had conversations, very positive ones, with different members of the Senate who are very interested in this bill and who are very surprised by the size or the margin of the overwhelming bipartisan support in the House. And as you know, the White House has asked the Senate to take up this bill quickly.
But as you know, President Biden has his campaign on TikTok. Do you agree with Senator Warner that it looks like he's basically speaking out of both sides of his mouth on this one? Is it unhelpful?
No, look, I'm not going to tell the president how to campaign. I don't have it on my personal app, on my personal phone, and it's, of course, banned from all of our government devices. I would just say that it's legal now, but I would ask everyone to exercise caution with regard to the app because of the various risks that we've outlined as part of this bill.
Congressman Gallagher, on the risks, we are 8 months out from the presidential election, and in the U.S. intelligence assessment that was made public on Monday, it specifically mentioned that the Chinese government propaganda arm used TikTok to target candidates from both political parties in those midterm elections in 2022. So we can only assume this is going to be happening in 2024 as well. Do you actually believe a forced sale will happen before November?
It absolutely could. It would be in the financial interest of ByteDance's investors to effectuate a forced sale. I think the user experience on the app would improve, and you wouldn't have this concern over being propagandized, the opaque algorithm influencing what information you see. That would go away, so I imagine it would actually increase in value. And I think all the more reason why we have to tackle this now. The closer we get to an election, the risk just gets greater and greater. You mentioned that unclassified DNI report. Every single intelligence community official that testified before the Intelligence Committee last week suggested under its current ownership structure, TikTok is a threat to national security, which is why we are trying to force TikTok to separate from ByteDance and, by extension, from the Chinese Communist Party.
But we've been hearing, respectfully, for 4 years or more that this is a national security threat and something needs to be done, and then it dies in Congress or in the courts. If this version becomes law, how do you actually stop it? Because this app is already on 170 million phones. Can you claw it back?
Well, if a divestiture happens, if the sale happens, you wouldn't need to claw it back. People can continue to use the app and post weird dance videos. They can campaign on the app. The forcing function we have in the bill is if they do not pursue a sale, then they would no longer have access to the app store, so you couldn't do new downloads. The website would also be affected, and so it would affect the functionality of the app. But again, that's not the outcome we want. The outcome we want is a forced separation. We think that's the healthiest for all parties involved, and just given the reporting we have and TikTok's own behavior in the last month, look at the pop-up notification they forced on millions of users that resulted in kids calling with school bells in the background saying, you know, if you don't rescind this bill, I'm going to kill myself. That's just a taste of how this app could be weaponized. Imagine a more consequential vote going forward about authorizing force to defend Taiwan or altering permanent normal trade relation status with China. That's the risk we're trying to guard against.
But is it really, gentlemen, just TikTok? I mean, there are no guardrails virtually in place for any kind of social media that those kids or us adults have access to, Congressman Krishnamoorthi.
I agree, and Mike and I would love to work with others with regard to putting guardrails in place with regard to other apps, regardless of their ownership. But this one is different in the sense that we have a foreign adversary controlling this app. Just to give your viewers a sense of it, essentially ByteDance is the 100% owner of TikTok. ByteDance basically has its editor-in-chief, who's also the secretary of the Chinese Communist Party cell, embedded at the highest echelons of the company to control all of its products. And he has been tasked with, quote, making sure all of its products, including TikTok, adhere to correct political direction. And so this is a different type of threat than we've seen before. And this divestment is not without precedent. There was an app called Grindr, a popular LGBTQ app that was acquired by a Chinese company. And when the U.S. government found that the CCP had access to sensitive data about LGBTQ members of the military and U.S. government officials, it required the divestment. It happened very quickly. Why? Because the app is was very valuable, much like TikTok, and there was no disruption to users. That's what will happen with regard to this divestment as well.
Congressman Gallagher, Mike Pence was here saying how disappointed he was that Donald Trump has changed his views on TikTok. This week he was on CNBC and said that, you know, oh, well, it'll just benefit Facebook if you crack down on TikTok. Doesn't that just incentivize the slow rolling of any legislation until after November? You know, the lobbyists can really grab right onto that.
Well, there is an unprecedented lobbying campaign. They're really weaponizing the swamp against legislative action. Over $500,000 spent last quarter alone on 7 different lobbying firms. It's disgusting. Former members of Congress lobbying on behalf of TikTok. By the way, that should be illegal. Members of Congress should not be allowed to lobby in general, let alone on behalf of foreign adversaries. Side note, but I do think the fact that we got a vote, really a huge vote in the House, bipartisan, 352, makes it impossible to ignore. And that's a testament to Raja's leadership, the fact that we were able to come together at a time when the parties don't trust each other on anything. Far better for Congress to step up and legislate a solution so that we're not bouncing back and forth between different presidents, different executive orders. That's a recipe for chaos.
And to be fair here, I mean, TikTok...
can I jump in for a second on
Sure,
that?
I do just want to say that TikTok, as you know, insists that it is not under the control of the Chinese Communist Party. Go ahead, Congressman.
That is completely false, and that is exactly why TikTok is in trouble on Capitol Hill. Their CEO has appeared on Capitol Hill repeatedly and made various misrepresentations, Margaret, that have caused members on both sides to really scratch their heads and vote for this bill. Just two, I'll just point out two very briefly. One is that he claimed that ByteDance China-based employees never had access to American user data, and that was proven to be false. They repeatedly access it, even unbeknownst to TikTok USA employees. And the second misrepresentation is that he said that this data, American user data, was never used against Americans. That was proven false, and the company admitted that they spied on journalists who were covering TikTok, and they used their geolocation data to surveil them. So this is why they're in such hot water on Capitol Hill.
All right. Congressman, thank you for joining us in this rare bipartisan action. Very quickly on TikTok, we'll be following what happens next. Thank you. And we'll be right back. We turn now to tech journalist and podcast host Kara Swisher, who is the author of Burn Book. She joins us now from Ann Arbor, Michigan. Kara, good to have you back on the program.
Thanks, Margaret.
So we just heard from two of the congressmen really pushing this legislation right now, but notably of a key Republican senator, Josh Hawley, who supports the bill, said the Senate will nickel and dime it, death by 1,000 cuts. Nothing that big tech doesn't want moves across the Senate floor. Do you think he's right? Why would this be different than any time in the past?
Well, I think, you know, there's a lot of lobbying going on about this bill, and the Senate is slower, and there's some issues in the bill that probably they're going to want to correct. And so, you know, slow rolling, it's the best way to have this thing not pass. It is unprecedented that it moves so quickly in the House, although it's been a long time coming. You remember Donald Trump's the one that had the executive order around TikTok and this service. And so this has been brewing for a long time. It's just that it will take a lot longer in the Senate to do it, and there's opponents like Rand Paul and others, and Chuck Schumer hasn't been particularly supportive or non-supportive of it. So it'll just take longer, and that's in the favor of TikTok.
And I know you've said in the past on this program, you use TikTok, but only on a burner phone. In other words, you don't trust that you could carry it on a phone with you into private spaces and not be spied on?
Look, Margaret, I don't trust any of them, but I particularly don't trust a Chinese-owned company, that's all. I had it on a burner phone. I wrote a column in the New York Times about 4 or 5 years ago about it. I think it's an exciting app. I think it's a broadcast network. It's obviously entertainment, and it does it really well. I just feel like every Chinese company I've covered has had the tentacles of the Chinese Communist Party involved in it, whether they like it or not. You know, in the case of some of them, they don't like it, but that's the case. Now, that's not to be said there's not issues with every single U.S.-based company, Meta and Alphabet. But this is a very different step level as far as I'm concerned. And this is a foreign adversary, and it's very different. China, a Chinese-owned company would not be able to own CBS. And I consider this is a media company. And so that's the question. Are we going to allow a media company from China to have so much purview around the United States? We are not allowed to be in China. Our companies are not allowed to be there, and so there's not reciprocity because they would be worried about the exact same things we should be worried about, which is propaganda, surveillance, anything else. And I get the First Amendment arguments and everything else, but TikTok's not going away, kids. This is the thing that's that TikTok's using a little bit that is, I think, disingenuous in that it's not going away. Someone's either going to buy it or they're going to be allowed to continue to operate with some guardrails, which is happening now with Project Texas, which I won't go into details, but there's got to be some way to monitor this particular service more than the others. At the same time, we should have privacy bills, antitrust bills, algorithmic transparency bills, which Congress has not acted on in 2 decades of internet hegemony, essentially.
Exactly. There aren't really guardrails, period. TikTok is valued at approximately $100 billion, according to Wedbush Securities, but just $40 billion without the source code. Who would buy this?
Oh, a lot of companies. You could see Microsoft picking it up, maybe Apple. There's a whole bunch of consortiums. Steve Mnuchin has one, Bobby Kotick, who just sold Activision to Microsoft. There's a lot of people who would buy this. No, I think the question is, and I had a really interesting discussion with Mark Cuban about this recently, what do you buy precisely? Because the algorithm's not coming with this company. The Chinese government would never let that happen because the algorithm will actually, if you could reverse engineer it, prove possibly that there is problems with it or anything else. I don't know if there is. I just know should there be allowed to have the opportunity. And so what are you buying? You're buying the 170 million, say, U.S. users and a great brand, but the algorithm isn't there. And one of the magic of TikTok is the algorithm and the history that you have there.
The thing that targets you. This past week, Elon Musk, who you cover in depth, posted that this bill is all about censorship and government control, and it's far too broad. There have been concerns about foreign investors in X and Twitter. What do you make of this argument from him?
Well, this is the guy who just fired someone for doing an interview. I don't know. I don't believe anything about what he says. You could make that argument, but why is it? If it's owned by a U.S. entity, you'll be able to do whatever you want. And again, Twitter is chock full of foreign investors and everything else. So I don't know. I don't really take that into account much. He just likes to say free speech a lot and then does the exact opposite. So I don't know what to say.
You're referring to an interview that Don Lemon did with Elon Musk and the controversy over that.
Yes, I'm sorry. I'm not being specific. Yeah, no, it's constant like that. Like talks about free speech and then freezes out journalists and stuff like that. Anyone that goes on and on about free speech, really, you have to really look more carefully about what they actually do rather than what they say. But in any case, that's the argument from that side. That is that argument. So,
but I raise him particularly because Mark Warner, the chair of the Senate Intelligence Committee, has said there's not a single person more beholden to the Chinese Communist Party than Elon Musk because of his other businesses. And yet he owns this.
I would agree. I would agree. I don't know. You have to, consider the source. That's how I would put it. I always consider the source, Margaret. And in this case, really consider the source.
And you know this business and this industry so well. Kara Swisher, thank you for your insight. We'll be back in a moment. According to UNICEF, 81% of households in Gaza don't have enough access to clean water, and 9 in 10 people do not have enough food to survive. The organization's executive director is Catherine Russell, and she's here with us. Welcome to Face the Nation.
Thank you very much. Thanks.
You focus in particular on the children. We heard this week from the leaders of the U.S. intelligence community that there will be a generational impact from what is happening in Gaza. The implications of that, they were looking through the national security lens. From your perspective, what does that mean? What does the generational impact mean?
Well, it means that what's happening now is more than 13,000 children already have been killed, which is an astronomical, horrifying number. Thousands more have been injured, or we can't even determine where they are. They may be stuck under rubble. Thousands more have lost one or both parents. Some of these children, you've seen them on the news, they're just by themselves managing their younger siblings. I mean, it's a horrifying situation. So when you think about the impact of that on those children as they grow up, even on their children, right, it is an impact that is so profound because of the stress that they're living under and the grief and the loss and the fear that they're living under. It's bound to have impacts on them the rest of their lives.
Since October 7th, 33 Israeli children have been killed in those horrific attacks of that day. As you just said, 13,000 in Gaza that you know of.
That we know of.
That's just horrific.
It's
for
all
the youngest.
Horrific. You know, honestly, the children who were killed in Israel, the children who were taken hostage,
yes.
There are still children who have not been returned to their families in Israel, all horrific, right? Every one of those cases is so heartbreaking for that child and that family. I think these numbers that we're seeing out of Gaza are just staggering. I mean, we haven't seen that rate of death among children in almost any other conflict in the world. It's really shocking.
So your organization says 31% of children, 1 in 3 under the age of 2, in northern Gaza suffer from acute malnutrition. This isn't just trauma. This is stunting them for life.
Yeah. Well, if they survive. And I have to say, I've seen a lot of children, unfortunately, in my job around the world who suffer from malnutrition. And it is a shocking thing to see. I mean, essentially, the body starts to consume itself because it has nothing else. And it's a painful death for children. I've been in wards of children who are suffering from severe malnutrition. The whole ward is absolutely quiet because the children, the babies, don't even have the energy to cry. I mean, it is a devastating thing to see. And you're right, if they survive it, if we can manage to get, what we do is provide therapeutic feeding for them. If we can get that to them, they can survive, but often they're stunted for life. And stunting means that your ability, your cognitive ability is impacted as well. So it is a lifelong challenge for these children if they survive. But we know now that children are dying from malnutrition in Gaza.
The CIA director testified about children starving in Gaza. Yeah. What are you able to actually get in at this point? And we know there are airdrops happening. Yeah. You can't airdrop vaccines. You can't airdrop things that need to be refrigerated. Yeah. So what's getting in and what do you need to get in?
Well, first of all, the one thing we know for sure is not enough is getting in. And the airdrops are, as you say, some things are coming in that way. Some things came in through this maritime corridor. But it's a drop in the bucket in both cases. And what we need to get in for children is what I said, this therapeutic feeding, which is something called Plumpy Nut. I don't know if you've ever seen it, but it's fantastic and it can save their lives. But we need to get it to them. And we have so little access right now. And it's very challenging. We also are facing very great bureaucratic challenges moving trucks in. trucks and moving things by land is by far the most efficient, effective way to get aid in. But there are a lot of challenges to that where we can't, I think, excuse me, Senator Van Hollen mentioned if things are dual use, sometimes they get rejected. So we can't get plastic pipes in. We can't get some medical kits if they have a little scissors in them. I mean, it's completely almost Kafkaesque sometimes trying to figure out how we get things in through this bureaucratic mess. And I think at the end of the day, those are choices that are made, right? If the choice is...
Those are political choices.
They are choices. And I think if the choice is to say we need to get as much humanitarian aid flooded into this area as possible, everyone can do better in that regard. And I think that the population there is suffering in such a terrible way. And I think one of the big challenges is because there's such limited access for the press, in addition, it's hard to see that, right? And I think it would be great if there were more transparency, if everyone could see what the challenges are, what the legitimate bottlenecks are, and how we could all do better.
We rely on our producer who lives in Gaza, Marwan Al-Ghul, but we cannot get in. You're correct.
Which is not right. It should be. You should be able to get in. You should be able to see what's happening. The world should be able to see what's happening and make their own judgments about what's going on.
Yes, the Israeli government has not permitted that to date. The ongoing crisis in Haiti, I need to ask you about that. This is so close to U.S. shores. Americans are watching it now. What is happening there? I read that 2/3 of children need aid.
Yeah. Haiti is a horrific situation. I was there several months ago. There was so much violence even then, and there were gangs who were controlling parts of the capital. Now they've basically taken over the capital. They've taken over the airport. What that means for people is that we can't get aid in again. It's very difficult for us to do that. Many, many people there are suffering from serious hunger and malnutrition, and we're not able to get enough aid to them. It's almost like it's like a scene out of Mad Max, honestly. That's what it seems like. Gangs, vigilantes responding to the gangs. I mean, somehow we need to get more control over that situation so that we can get the humanitarian response in, and so that this population that has suffered kind of one thing after another over the years, earthquakes, cholera, COVID. I mean, it's literally one thing after another for Haiti. And I think right now it's the worst that anyone has seen in decades.
That's saying a lot.
That's saying a lot.
Catherine Russell, thank you for sharing your insights.
Thanks, Margaret.
We'll be right back. That's it for us today. Thank you all for watching. Until next week. For Face the Nation, I'm Margaret Brennan.